Hi, readers. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Katie.
And welcome to Not Another Heroine, the podcast where we break down the best and worst fictional heroines, those swashbuckling ladies who have to work a little harder than expected for their happy ending.
We'd love for you to come read with us in our book club on the Fable app, where you can chat with us about your favorite scenes, vote for your favorite characters, and even help pick our next read. Or you can follow us on Instagram to get a sneak peek at upcoming content. This week, we're reading Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier, otherwise known as I'm Still Gonna Call Her Oonagh.
Well, hello, Katie.
Hello, Jordan.
And hello, everyone listening. Welcome to a brand new book. I am very much looking forward to discussing this one.
Mm-hmm. This is I forgot how good this book was. And then I started reading it and I was immediately like, oh no, like there goes my sleep schedule.
I know but it's such a slow burn book. It's one of the few very like methodical, slow books that I absolutely love, but like it kind of hurts to just take your time with it.
That's fair. I feel like I have more recently appreciated those like slow burn books because I feel like the setup makes everything more worth it. Like, because I feel like when I was younger, which isn't really saying anything because I'm still young.
I was gonna say, how old are we, Katie?
But like earlier around high school, I wanted those books that was like constant action, constant, something happening. But like this one is a good example of those books that is you are immediately invested, but it's not quick. There's not a lot of like story plot points that happen, like back to back or fast, but is worth it and good, and you're still invested the whole time. I don't know. It's a hard balance, I feel like, but this, Juliet.
She does it perfectly. But before we get any further into this book, we had our listener who recommended Graceling to us actually came back and had some questions for us. So here it is. I enjoy hearing your thoughts on this book. I've been wondering what your thoughts are on character growth and the main character's love interest. It is the one thing that I feel like is missing in both Graceling and Crown Jewel. It seems like the protagonist needs to grow to realize her feelings, but the love interest is already there, and I'm struggling a bit to find the character flaw in both Shivraeth and Poe. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that
like
was
you and I.
What I Like to Do is their YouTube handle. Are they called handles on YouTube? Account name?
I have no idea.
Handle?
I just recently learned how to work it in the past few months.
But what a good question.
Like I know. I saw this comment and I'm like, I was kicking myself for not thinking of it myself to discuss, because we spend so much time going on and on about how much we love Shivraeth and how much we love Poe without really sitting back to consider like, oh, these are basically perfect men.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's no sort of character development that they really go through. And I think the part that's like problematic for me is that you have this like emotionally mature, like well-developed, in tune with his emotions, like male character. And then he's always trying to help the like emotionally immature female character. And like all the growth is always on her side. And there's never any things that like he has to overcome. And then even with Poe, like towards the end, he obviously had like a significant event that he had to kind of overcome, but that was cut off. Like you don't get to experience that growth through the novel. They just kind of like cut it off, and it's implied that they work on it together. But because I feel like ACOTAR has the same thing. Reese or whatever has like he's totally emotionally mature, and he's just waiting for like Feyre to catch up.
Even, and especially with Poe too, it feels like the growth that he does have to display is justified based on the circumstances, right? Like, is he really growing, or did life just slap him in the face, right? And he's already a fully formed person. Like, does that even count?
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know.
But
because he had like anti-character growth, and then he had to like come back and like get past a really horrific traumatic event, which I guess is kind of character growth. Like, I don't know. We had like a regress, and then we have to like go back.
And Shivraeth, I can't think of it. Like, aside from his more, I guess, reserved attitude and behaviors and his kind of closed offedness. We're going to make that a word.
I think it's a word.
I mean, I can't really think of anything to fault that character for.
I don't think so either. I mean, and it's kind of hard too because like towards the end, like the glove scene or whatever, and he kind of shows her the ring. You have this moment where he's kind of like not as reserved and he like admits his love to her and stuff. But it's almost like, oh, I'm glad you finally caught up. You know what I mean? He didn't have to grow and like purposely like show more affection to Mel because like that's the only way she'll understand. It was like, oh, you finally figured it out. Okay, now we can talk the same. It's like he didn't have to do anything.
You know, it seems to me like there's two extremes in this genre that we read, which is like the perfect hero or the total anti-hero with so much emotional baggage and has dark, twisty things going on, but it's okay because he's hot, right? Like those are the two ends of the spectrum, and there's no realistic, like human men with real flaws that they either overcome or other people around them like acknowledge, like, hey, you're not perfect and you need to work on this, but you know, I still love you. Mm-hmm. Can you think of anything that
I don't
sits in the middle?
Think so. I feel like I may have read like one or two, but I can't name them off the top of my head. From Lee Bordego. What is her book? Six of Crows, I think is what it's called. But that one, so the main character, Kaz Brecker, however you pronounce his name, Kaz, he went through this like super traumatic childhood, super fucked up, is really cutthroat, and he wears gloves. I don't want to like spoil this for anyone, so if you want to read this book and you haven't, just like skip forward 30 seconds. But him and his younger brother or older brother were dumped in a river to like die, and I think the brother was like killed already, and so he was like gripping onto his like cold dead body because he didn't want to let him go. And so Kaz like permanently wears like leather gloves, and he like won't touch anyone skin to skin, but he has this like character arc with his like love interest where he like eventually like works up the will to take off his gloves and like actually like touch her face, and it's this whole like, you know, very romantic scene without any actual like traditional romance. But that's like really the only I can think off the top of my head, and that's kind of like a weird one because he's a villain character, sort of.
Now I need to read that book. I have.
It's part of the Shadow and Bone series, like a same universe.
Yeah, I saved all of those books. I saved all the samples on my Kindle because I finished Shadow and Bone and loved it and hated myself for not reading it sooner because I love the buildup of that one, but I'm kind of waiting to explore more of that author.
That's fair. Yeah.
We have a couple trigger warnings. Is that?
Yeah.
I am sorry that I have to give these, but I think you should. If you haven't already read this book and you are intrigued by the description, I would hate for you to start this book and for these to be like read, like super read. I'm going to put this book down and never touch it again because the story is beautiful. It's amazingly well written, but these could be like hard lines for people. So just going to put it out there. There is a very graphic rape scene about 150, 200 pages in, I would say. There are several mentions of animals being mutilated or killed. There's several assault scenes. There's torture that's kind of talked around. It's not as graphic as some of the other stuff. And there's also mentions of some self-harm, not by the main character, but by a secondary character. So that's a lot.
Yeah. Like listening to it all like written out feels very hefty.
Yeah.
But this is like a 650 page book. So like to put it a little bit in perspective, it's not like it's like a 300 page book and the only thing that you are experiencing are all of these horrible triggers. It's spread out.
It is. And, you know, I say graphic, but it is not as graphic as I know has been written in other books.
Yeah.
So you know exactly what's happening, but it is not, it's as much detail as given to provide context for the story, I would say.
I could see that.
Yeah. But this is based on a fairy tale, a very, very old fairy tale.
Mhm.
I think it's the Children of Lear.
It's like something like that, or the Seven Swans, or the Swan Lady. So I don't know anything about fairy tales. So the like ones that I know, I'm like, oh, it's like this one. It feels kind of like Swan Lake, but a way more depressing Swan Lake, which Swan Lake is already pretty depressing. So that's like a high threshold.
What's interesting too with this book is that it's written in first person.
I didn't even realize this was in first person. What?
So, and that's why I bring it up though, because it doesn't feel like it's written in first person, because the language is just beautiful in this book. And it's told with such description of the scenery and the other characters. And you really feel like you get to know the world and everyone in it. So
it's super like atmospheric, I think is the word. Like you're like immediately launched in and you get all of the vibes. I feel like I just said the Gen Z version of what Jordan like literally just said, but it felt important to say.
Yes. Okay. Well, to get our heroine rolling here. So her name is Sorsha. And shockingly enough, when I went to write down all of my notes, I remembered all of the names.
Whoa.
Like I didn't check the book once. I got all her brothers. I got all the secondary characters. And I think that kind of speaks to how vivid the book sits in your brain.
And how individual personalities all of the brothers have. Because I feel like a lot of books kind of suffer from that. Oh, there's a lot of people, but you can't really tell them apart at all besides their name. But these are all extremely distinct characters. Like they all have very specific personalities. Like it's very easy to tell them apart and you're not like totally overwhelmed.
I want to say that Sorsha's father, like you get 3 or 4 scenes with him. Like he's mentioned more than that, but like you only see his character a couple times, but you still get a very clear sense of like who this person is.
Yeah, he has all of the like overly aggressive paternal dad vibes. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about just by that phrase, like aggressive, can never be pleased, like shows a little bit of a half smile and you're like, oh my God, I pleased my dad. Like,
yeah, actually that's perfect. Okay, we will progress in some way. So, okay, Sorsha is the 7th daughter of Lord Colum, the aggressive father figure we're talking about. And Lord Colum is the like chieftain of a land like holding called Seven Waters, which is this forested kind of mystical place somewhere in like ancient Ireland. Sometimes after the Roman civilization fell and before the British took over everything. So Sorsha was born, I think, in the midwinter solstice. It was like a winter celebration. And so she was the last child, and her mother didn't die in childbirth, but like died soon after she was born, like that day. And very traumatic, like shaped the childhood of Sorsha and her 6 older brothers. And so her older brothers, in order of like oldest to youngest, is, I'm not going to pronounce all of these correctly. So Liam, Diarmid, Connor, Diarmid, Connor and Cormac, which are twins, Finbar, which is the best name ever, and Podrick. Oh my God, Podrick.
That
yes.
I only know that from Game of Thrones.
I should have done that.
Do you get into their personalities at all?
I don't, but we certainly can break them down. Yeah. It is a fun piece.
So quick speed round. Liam, think of the oldest brother in the Chronicles of Narnia. So like oldest boy syndrome, very serious, takes everything serious. Diarmid, the like second son syndrome. So he's kind of like a player boy, has like a smirk all the time and like people follow him because he's fun. Connor, super serious. He like goes on this whole like mystic vision journey to be like a druid. So like 150 years old in like a 15-year-old body. Cormac, he's the one that loves animals, right? Oh no, he's the one that's super good at like all kinds of fighting things. And then Finbar is like the way too serious Justin Bieber hair, but it's black. And he's like, you don't understand me, Dad. That's Finbar. And then Podrick is like the cute little like fluffy, loves animals and like tinkering with shit. And he's just like out there living his life. And he's like, I'm the youngest son. I just do whatever and I'm living my life. So that's the brothers.
That was the best wrap up of some very serious characters. Okay. So we are dropped into Sorcia's childhood, and like you don't get to jump forward. You just start at I think age 8 or 10 maybe. It's pretty young. And so we get all of these beautiful scenes where she's growing up running barefoot in the woods. She has no mother, so she's kind of like, and her father doesn't give a shit because, you know, he's a warlord essentially. And so she kind of is raised by her brothers, and she learns the art of healing from Father Brian, who is a like Christian wise man, retired mercenary figure who kind of lives in his own little hut in the woods and like occasionally visits the little village, township, castle thing where Seven Waters is.
I kind of imagined like a hermit. Mm-hmm. That's what that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's what So, although Sorcia is closest in age to Podrick, I think she's 2 years younger, she has a much closer relationship with Finbar, who she shares this kind of telepathic mind reading ability with. And I thought this was super cool. Like, this feels like a historical novel, but there's like touches of mysticism and like otherworldly events that don't feel like magic. They just feel like, oh, of course that happened in our history.
Yeah.
So like this mind reading thing she shares with her siblings, she's like, oh, like, yeah, that's totally plausible. I can see that.
Because I feel like we've all been to those places that, okay, so like we get magic's not real in like the real world, but there's like those places where you're like, if it could exist, it would be here. Like old growth forests, 100%. You walk through them and you're like, I am not alone. Like these trees have some souls in them. I swear to God. But it's like that vibe where everything is just like realistic, but shift it like one step to the right into the, like there's some like magic vibes going on. You can't really always pinpoint it, but it's on like the hair on the back of your neck stands up. That vibe is like conveyed really well throughout this book.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to remember a movie I've seen. It was like a King Arthur Merlin-esque movie that has the same kind of setting. Have you ever been to the Olympic rainforest?
Yes.
On the peninsula?
That's exactly what I was thinking. It feels alive.
So
like
and readers, if you've never been to the Olympic National Forest in Washington State, it is unworldly. Mm-hmm. Like the kind of green you can't even like picture in your mind. So check it out. Going back to our lovely atmospheric book. So there's a scene very early on. So there's a lot of little childhood reminiscing and like, this is how I grew up and this is what I learned. And Sorcia is a very like observational character. I don't think that's the right way to put it, but
I can see that. Yeah.
She's not a doer, right? Like she kind of reacts to the world around her and observes everyone else. Mm-hmm. We don't get that a lot in like heroines, right? Mm-hmm. She's a very kind of low-key character. Yeah. And I think that kind of contributes to the reason why this doesn't feel like a first-person narrative.
I was about to say, because there's so much dialogue between the brothers that it doesn't feel like it's first person. You just feel like you're part of the conversation or watching the conversation happen.
She's about
she's like a baby. Because that's why I was so like disturbed in the scene. I'll let you like talk through the scene, but I was reading it and I'm like, oh God, because you can just imagine their like fat little fingers. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, no, thank you for catching that age, because I thought she was older. But yeah, you're right. So okay, actually, let's get to the scene. So she's out playing in the woods like baby Sorcia. And just so you know, you don't spend a lot of time in baby Sorcia's brain. She's like, so Sorcia like relays stories she's been told by her brothers. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of sitting in 10-year-old Sorcia's head, and she's like experiencing the stories that she knows about herself. So she's playing out in the woods with her brothers, and she goes to pick this like very pretty flower. And just as she's about to grab it, one of her brothers, I think it's Finbar or Connor, yell at her to stop. And like she, being like a toddler, just ignores them and grabs the flower anyway, only to immediately find her hand like just stung and filled with all of these minuscule barbs. And I think they call it the starflower plant, something similar.
Starwort?
Do you remember? Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the...
Yeah, because that's why the scene was just so like, so for two things. So like one, because if you've ever experienced toddlers or been around toddlers, they will just go and grab shit with their hands, not thinking. And you can be like, hey, don't grab that. And they're going to be like, gonna grab it anyway. And then they immediately suffer the consequences of their actions if you don't like yeet them out of the way. So that's why this was so like, oh, that poor little baby with their pudgy little fingers. And there's a bunch of little like pines in it. Like, oh God, I can't imagine. But like this flashback also, like, so second point, this flashback kind of serves to set kind of the expectations of how Saoirse's relationship has always been with her brothers. It's very much the like, they are all protective of each other. They all take care of each other. They're like one super cohesive, like 7-person unit of like, you know, they do everything together and they understand each other and they like can respond to each other's needs. And that theme kind of goes out throughout the book. And then especially when you get to the like, what is it called? Like climbing action? When you're
culminating?
No, like the incline. When things like start to, you have some like, I need to take like a literature class again or something. But it's like the up climb, like something happens and then the action starts to go up. This point about her and her brothers being so close and their dynamics is super important when that happens. So it like kind of sets this, it's like a fun, I'm not going to explain it. You're going to see it firsthand of how these like brothers and sisters like work together.
Also, like with this particular scene, I didn't realize how much foreshadowing is built into this book.
Yeah,
so
literally.
Yeah, this scene is super important. And you and I have both read this before, and I missed this on the first go.
Mm-hmm.
So remember this scene for later on.
Yeah.
And then kind of right around this point in the book as well, we get another story like told by Saoirse via her brother's experiences. And that's the night that her mother died and she was born. So, and that kind of plays into the family dynamics that you were describing, is like these 7 children operating as a single unit. So the night that their mother died, the mother called each child basically to her bedside and made some sort of pronouncement, like descriptor of like, oh, Liam, you're the oldest, you will look out for all your siblings. And Finbar, you see the most, like with your unworldly kind of gaze and that kind of thing. And she kind of gives them each a task or a token, and then tells them to, I think, visit the forest, right? Mm-hmm. So the forest is a very integral part of the story. And she kind of has a sacred tree where she tells her children, like, come to the tree and I'll be there for you no matter what happens. Mm-hmm. So
it's like a birch seed. Because I think it's like some kind of magic. Like the mom is described as being not half wild, but half wild in the sense like magical. Because she like tells her kids that as soon as you plant that seed, like that'll be my spirit or whatever. And so that's how you can talk to me, is like the tree is like a spot where you can all be together and I'll protect you and we'll all kind of like live together still. Yeah, one of those very like metaphysical, magic-y kind of, you know.
Well, okay, and the whole like love of nature and preserving nature and having this kind of spiritual connection with the forest and the land also happens throughout the book.
Yeah.
And it kind of contributes to the vibes, I would say.
Yep.
That scene is another thing that kind of circles back around later on.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty soon after this, we get to meet Colum, the father figure, who's, like you already put it perfectly, like he's distant but not cruel. He's just very preoccupied with his like ongoing war with the Britons. No one knows why they're at war, except they want to take our land and we want to keep our land, and you know they're barbarians and they're gonna die. So he quickly trains his like 3 oldest children, so Liam, Diarmid, and Cormac, mm-hmm. I want to say, to like campaign with him. So they're all trained in swordsmanship and they're warriors. And Colum routinely, like upon returning home after like a battle or something, like has an audience with his children. Like I'm envisioning Captain Von Trapp from Sound of Music.
That's exactly what I was thinking. He has them all like line up and like inspects them, and he's like, you're
Little
growing well.
Yeah. So Colum is like particularly distant with Saoirse because 1, she looks like her mother. 2, she's the only girl. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of got her mom's like fairy wild vibes going on.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like in Colum's defense, kind of, he's described throughout the book as like super distant, but I think it's somewhere in like the beginning, middle part, it's kind of revealed that he was like deeply in love with the kid's mom. And so as one of those, I feel like people have a very distinct way of dealing with grief, and his was like to completely shut down. And I think Father Brian, I think, is the one that says it, like that's the only way he can survive is if he just completely detaches himself and his like soul left with his wife. So it's like, yeah, he's a dick, but like he's grieving still. Not that that's an excuse, but that's why he is how he is.
No, I think so. That's another really, it's not a cool piece, right? But it made me want to like have a prequel story of how like Colum met Sorsha's mom.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Because it was Father Brian who's like, yeah, your father wasn't always the man he is now. Like he was very fun loving and everybody loved him and respected him, and your mother changed him. Like, oh, that's another cute story. Like, let's get that. Because I can
just imagine perfectly. She was probably like yeeting herself through some like muddy, misty like forest, and then he like stumbles upon her as he's like riding his horse out, and he's like, who the fuck is this like wild woman? Like, I need me some of that. And then she's like, no, I don't think I need you.
I need some of that.
I kind of imagine like Bridgerton season 2 vibes, where she's just like riding her horse out, and then they have some like fun little race, and he's like, what the fuck? She like beat me? That's how I imagine the relationship. Not that that's really important to the story whatsoever, but
completely separate imaginary story that we don't know actually happens. But but that's again like how good this book is, because you just want to know every single piece that's going on. So fast forward a little bit, when Sorsha is about 12, I think. Oh, so before I go into that, I feel like I'm going to stumble on caveat after caveat with this
probably.
The reason why this book feels very historical and why you kind of have to approach it with a historical mindset is the ages of the characters.
Yeah.
So for most of the story, I think Sorsha is between the ages of 13 and 15 or 16. And then like the men in the book, and they're described as like grown men and warriors, are like usually no older than early 20s, late teens, which tracks, right? Like people matured earlier, like they had lifespans until like 40. So it fits, but it might be hard, like a hard pill to swallow for modern audiences.
Yeah, because it's kind of the same with Game of Thrones. Like they're all described as really young, and then they brought their ages up for the movie series or the TV series. And then because I think there's like this old random guy in the book, old Tom. He's only described as being like 40-ish, and he's like old, like decrepit.
Right, but it's realistic.
Yeah.
So yeah. And Sorsha, like, so definitely does not act like a modern day 12-year-old, right? She acts like, I don't know, like late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
I'd say like mature child to begin with, and then like compensating. I would put her at about 23, 24 maybe.
Yeah. I would say like probably like I thought she was 17, and then I was disturbed when she said she was 13. I was like, oh, don't love that at all. But because she kind of has that like still young gaze on the world, like the I can never say that word, naivety. Not a nativity scene, not naive. Someone please stop me.
I can't help you on this one because I don't know how to pronounce it myself. So
oh my God.
Rob is probably just cringing in his seat if he's listening to this right
We have
now.
like one of these moments probably like 40 times an episode.
Yes, exactly.
But she has this like naiveness about her, but also like weirdly
making up words because we can't
probably
pronounce ones we know.
Naive plus some kind of suffix at the end. Took me a second to even come up with that. I'm gonna stop. She's naive but also weirdly mature.
So okay, young, but story works with it.
Yeah.
So she's about 12. Her father invites a neighboring chieftain, like a neighboring lordship, Seamus, and his daughter. I remembered Seamus's name, and we never actually get a scene with him. We get a couple scenes with the daughter. Can't remember the daughter's name.
Seamus?
Is it Seamus?
I thought it was Seamus.
It is Seamus, not Seamus.
Not what? Oh my
I'm not going to
God.
pronounce any more character names in this book. I'm just going to be like the other lord.
I only know this from Harry Potter, so
I give up at this point. I'm doomed.
we all are.
And these are real names. That's the other thing.
This is true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Seamus and his daughter, who shall not be named, visit Seven Waters, and Sorsha is definitely not impressed by the daughter.
Mhm.
But like she observes her older brothers like falling all over themselves to escort this chick around the gardens. And like eventually after some like Diarmid and Liam like posturing, it's eventually announced that Liam and the daughter are engaged. And this causes Sorsha to have like a mini preteen emotional breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And so she runs off to her room and is like followed and comforted by Diarmid. But what Sorsha is really struggling with here is not like the loss of her brother to like this outsider. It's just this inability to reconcile who she is and how she behaves with this other girl who's like not much older than she is, but has like an incredibly different like set of interests and behaviors. And she kind of resigns herself to the fact that like Liam has like, if not poor, maybe boring taste in women. And like she kind of puts on a good face and like returns to support her family. Like there's a huge engagement celebration going on.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting because like when I was reading that scene, I don't have older brothers. I have like younger siblings, but I can perfectly imagine that feeling where you're no longer the only woman in a group who matters. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of the like I thought we were a group, but now you're adding in this extra person. Like who even is this chick? Like she's not fun. I don't like her. She's not like us. Like who is this? So it's like almost like being replaced in like priority in someone's life. Like I can perfectly like imagine that craziness. But like your point is totally absolutely on track too. Like that makes total sense because she's having this like I'm a wild girl and she's like doing, embroidery.
I think both factors are feeding into like Sorsha's turmoil there. Like it's definitely like my brother's growing up and away from our group, and also like, who is this bitch?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I love about this book. It's like so dynamic. I picked up on a phrase or word and I had this whole different like interpretation of the scene. And then like you picked on Jordan, you like picked on one word and then like had a different interpretation. Like there's so much there that you can have like these both fully developed impressions of a scene and they're both right. Like
I think this was the author's first book.
What?
Yeah.
Bruh.
I think it is, or it might have been like the first one she got published.
That is so impressive.
But, yeah,
because this is like it feels. I haven't read a lot of like epics or like classic literature, but this feels like it could be in that. Like if they finally accepted, fantasy into classic literature, like that everyone needs to read. I feel like this would be at that level.
Yeah, I think it should be there. I mean, it's beautifully done. And it started off as a sidebar here. This book started off as being part of a trilogy, and then I think she expanded it, and there's like 7 or 8 books set in the world.
God damn. Oh, is this the one where each brother gets a book?
No.
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of Bridgerton. Okay.
Everything circles back to Bridgerton.
True.
There ain't nothing wrong with that, though. Ugh. Can we just get to Benedict's story? Like,
I feel that. He's so cute and like he's like the golden retriever of the group.
You're so right. Yep, absolutely. We do not have a Benedict in this book. That's probably for the best.
Yeah.
So, okay, back to the engagement celebration with Sorsha, not Bridgerton. So she returns to like the big dinner thing, and this is pretty much immediately interrupted by Lord Cullum's men arriving. Like they storm into the castle hall with a captured Briton, and he's like described as this young warrior with golden blonde hair, and he like a Briton because of their light hair and their like taller build. And so Lord Cullum immediately like orders everybody out, recognizes that this prisoner seems like special, like probably closer to nobility. And he directs his men to like take the prisoner away and just get as much information out of him as possible.
Mm-hmm. And what I love
Very
about
dark.
this too is like this kid, I think he's what, 15, 16? He's like described, and Sorsha immediately describes him as those kind of people that despite being beat up, captured, kidnapped, is like defiant. He like had his, chin up high despite like being actively like bleeding at the moment. But he was like, no, fuck you. And then I think he like spits at Lord Colum, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, he does. He like spits at his boot, like just full on, fuck you, dude.
I
like,
love characters like that are like, I cannot breathe, but fuck you, man.
Dude, this character is quite heartbreaking.
Yeah.
There is a lot of, and we're edging towards that part right now.
My soul.
So, yeah. And this is kind of where we start edging towards those trigger warnings. So later in that same evening where the prisoner arrives, Finbar, who has always like been the most rebellious, Justin Bieber hair-esque to quote you, I just can't get that out of my head.
Yeah, the like emo,
yeah.
You don't understand me, Dad.
So he kind of sneaks up to Sorsha's room to beg her help in making a potion because like she's very well known, like even despite being 12, she's a very well-known healer and she's very good. And so he wants to help the Breton escape for really no other reason than that he disagrees with his father's war and doesn't understand why the fighting has to continue. And when I wrote this, like I can immediately see why the entire family would be pissed and like would want to throw Finbar off a castle like turret because you're a child and holding prisoners is bad, but we're also at war. Like there is no great solution to this.
He does have this little like fuck you dad moment before this where they're all being like lined up to be looked at or whatever weird thing Lord Colum's doing. And Finbar is like, no, I'm not going to go out and campaign with you. And he's like, what the fuck did you say? And Finbar's like, I don't think that just like fighting and killing each other is really going to solve anything. And maybe we should actually talk to them and just explain that, they invaded these like mystic islands that are super important to us. And maybe if we just talk to them, things could be okay. And like Lord Colum is like, blah, 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 spitting mad. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a kid. And it's like this weird moment of like, oh, okay, this, 13-year-old is very mature and is having like a little like moment. But he's like the whole time he's planning this like escape, he's like, I'm just doing it because it's the right thing. And it's like, damn, okay, you're committing treason.
Yeah, full on treason. And like, so Finbar makes allusions to how cruel their father's treatment of previous prisoners has been. Like he kind of is a little reluctant to share this with, I don't know, a child like Sorsha, but he's like, can we do this? Can you help me? Because like I fear for this man's life. And so she very reluctantly agrees to help. And the gist of this is she's going to make like a sleeping potion for the guards. Pause here because I know we're supposed to love Finbar. Like Sorsha talks so much like about Finbar and how close she is with him, Finbar, but I thought he was the most annoying of the brothers.
Oh my God.
I didn't like him. I wanted more Podrick.
That's fair. Yeah. Podrick reminds me of like the golden retriever type that are just like vibing. But Finbar, I always have a soft spot for the like emo kid that's like, nobody understands me because like, aren't we all emo kids at heart? So I just thought Finbar was like one of those stick to your gun. What? There's a specific word I'm thinking of. It's not there. Idealist. There it is. That he like has like really strong ideals and morals and thoughts on the world, and he's going to stick to those despite maybe it not being always the best path. And he kind of has this like deep otherworldly moments where he like talks as if he's 40 years old and can see things. I don't know. He's like a fun character, but he's kind of the like mystery, like in the shadows.
He's definitely like he's a necessary character, I think, especially for their group dynamics. But like Podrick I could have used more of, and if I were going to pick a favorite, it would be Connor.
Yeah.
Connor,
Same.
hands down, obviously, for reasons that shall be revealed later on. But so next day, Sorsha has agreed to make this potion, and she learns how mysteriously the prisoner managed to disappear somehow between guard shift changes. And conveniently, I think her father left with all his men either the night before or early that morning to go pursue any remaining Britons in the area. So just very convenient timing with this prisoner escape. But after this happens, Father Brian, that's the Christian priest hermit type, comes to visit Sorsha and asks for her help to come visit his hut under very mysterious circumstances. I wonder what this could be. Yeah. It's very quickly revealed that the escaped prisoner has been under Father Brian's care. So in between the prisoner escaping and then Father Brian coming to Sorsha for help, it's been a week or two, I want to say.
Yeah.
So Father Brian has been unable to truly help the prisoner recover. And this is where they start making references to PTSD, for example, the prisoner is waking up in the middle of the night trying to off himself, won't eat, won't take any medication, is just delirious with nightmares, in addition to physical injuries. So Father Brian is very convinced that Sorsha in some way can help make progress with him. So she agrees to go to the hut and visit him. And so this is another if I was going to find any kind of fault with this book, it would be the convenience of giving Sorsha the ability to understand the tongue of the Britons.
Yeah.
So Father Brian taught Sorsha and I think Connor.
And Finbar, I think.
And Finbar how to, would you call it English? Old English? Very old English, I guess?
Yeah, because if it's Brit, and it would be English. So they're probably speaking Gaelic normally.
Yeah, Sorsha and her family would be.
Little fun fact.
But yeah, so she knows how to speak English, and she can also read and write very well for a 12-year-old. So that was the one piece that kind of deviated from the historical accuracy bit. I get this is a fantasy, right? But it just kind of, if I was going to be nitpicky, it would be that piece. But
because I think
it's basic.
No, go ahead.
I refuse.
Because I think Sorsha even comments on that herself. She's I didn't realize at the time how weird it was that I could, that we had scrolls and we could read and write and nobody else can really do that. So I see that it's kind of removes us from a little bit of the historical accuracy and kind of oh, okay, that's convenient, right? But I feel it also kind of adds to the mysticism, magic-y kind of thing. Of course they know how to do this. They're magic, and conveniently in this sacred little place you can do whatever you want, and historical realities don't matter.
It was definitely a convenient touch, but it's necessary for the story to actually work. So Sorsha goes to the hut, and the prisoner, whose name we learn pretty quickly is Simon, he eventually begins to accept food and water and treatment from Sorsha after several days of cajoling and arguing, and she's just very calm but persistent. And she stays awake late at night to prevent him from hurting himself and also to wake him from nightmares. And she fills the time by telling him stories of the fair folk. And eventually Sorsha and Simon establish this very tentative rapport. And
I feel some of that stems too because they made a promise, right? Didn't she say, you have to promise me that you'll try to get better and I'll promise you to stay here? Because I feel that promise, that joint partnership is super important, because I could see him seeing Father Brian as this paternalistic, oh, you need to get better because the Lord wants to save you. But Sorsha's just how about you just get better and I won't leave you? And he's okay. Tentatively, yes.
So I totally forgot about the promise. And now that you mentioned it, So that's another piece of foreshadowing that I just put together.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like mind blown.
It was just so cute when I was reading it because it kind of has that like childhood innocence about it of like, it's not sexual or romantic when you're this age. It's just kind of like that friendship where it's like, no, we're going to like stick this out weirdly because like, I don't really know you, but we're friends now.
Yeah, because so 15 to 16-year-old for Simon and Sorcia's 12. And Simon is also like, oh, you guys are just like barbarians and like basically savages and don't know how to, like, you don't fight fair. You use these brutal tactics. And so he's got these preconceived notions about like Sorcia and her people and her family,
also,
and vice versa.
Validated conceptions.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't really go into detail about how much torture Simon experienced before he escaped, and it's significant. So the author doesn't explicitly state what happens, but it is awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he does not, like, it's not just he was thrown in a cell and managed to escape the next morning. Oh no, they tortured him for hours and he can barely function.
Yeah. And I feel like if you've read any historical fiction or you've seen movies or like even read actual histories of this area during that time frame, like the shit they do is like big fucked up. Like not the whole like, oh, even just like ripping out fingernails. That's like low on the totem pole of how fucked up the things they're doing is. So his whole like PTSD thing 100% makes sense. Like, and I feel like you feel sympathetic to him the whole time. It doesn't feel forced or like, oh, he's kind of like being dramatic about it. Like the whole time you're like, oh, I get it, man.
Yeah. So another piece that kind of helps him recover, along with like the promise that he and Sorcia make to each other and all of her stories, is so Sorcia's brother Cormac has a dog that he rescued as a puppy, and the dog's name is Lynn. Lynn has a very prominent role throughout the story, from like the moment you meet this dog, who's like a wolfhound hybrid kind of dog. And so while Cormac and the two, Liam and Diarmid, are off campaigning, so Lynn stays home and accompanies Sorcia. And so she, Lynn, the dog, is with Sorcia, and she helps Simon recover. So she's like chilling with him on his little recovery bed and like nuzzling up to him. And it definitely a huge factor for helping him kind of process what he's gone through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, I don't want to spoil anything, but for me, so Lynn has a very prominent role. I'm going to foot stomp that. And she has a very, very tragic end. It is.
It hurt.
I know. I'm just imagining the scene right now. We'll get to that scene, I think, in part 2. But if that is another thing for you as a reader where you just, nope, can't read it, got to put the book down and never return to it, like that happens. So probably stop reading.
Yeah.
If that's going to be hard for you. I will say it's a good end for a good dog, but it's very hard to read.
Yeah.
Ugh, I'm just thinking about it now is awful.
It's like, this is one of those books that's like, you're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it. Like, it's that whole Harry Potter quote all over again. Like, there's so many fucking horribly tragic things that happen, but it's also like a happy ending. So, like, kind of all works out in the end, but like, oh man, are you going to fucking work for it?
Yeah. And so none of it seems gratuitous, right? Like it does upon like describing it in such a short amount of time, like you and I are discussing right now. Yeah. But again, you have hundreds and hundreds of pages to process all of this stuff. It's not just thrown at you.
It kind of reads like an epic.
It does.
Yeah.
Like the whole series is very epic. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So one of the cool scenes, or several scenes, as Sorcia is helping Simon recover, is she tells him these fair folk stories. And you kind of get these little short glimpses as she's telling them. And so one of the stories is about a pair of lovers who were celebrated. I wrote celebrated and I meant separated.
Oh.
Separated by the fair folk. Yeah. So in the story, the man is taken away by the fairy queen for several decades, like goes under the hill, and he doesn't age. But he, despite all of these years passing, remains true to like his human love that got left behind. They're eventually reunited, and when they meet again, he's young, but she has aged. But in his eyes, she's just as beautiful as the day he was taken away. And so she reverts back to her young, beautiful self, and they're reunited and live happily ever after. That's one of these stories that Saoirse tells. Huge hint there.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. And then, meanwhile, Simon also tells Saoirse some stories, and one of them is of these two brothers. And one is the older, wise, successful in all his endeavors. And the other is the younger, never quite good enough or loved as much as the elder. And the younger brother is given an opportunity to prove himself. But Simon stops the story and he's like, I'm not sure what happens at the end. Wonder what this story could be about.
Yeah. And I feel like it's kind of subtle and I didn't really understand as it was happening. But as they kind of like work together to help Simon get better, Simon kind of reveals some like details about the story too. And they're disjointed enough, which would make sense because he's obviously like suffering as he's trying to like tell these little tidbits. But there's like one where he like betrayed on accident his like group and everyone died and he like woke up alone. So I feel like Simon's character definitely has some like survivor's guilt too, where like he feels and I think that's another thing too, is like he is super worried that when he was being tortured, he like told them something that'll like reveal, details about where his family is or where his, troops are or whatever. So he has like a lot of guilt too. And I think that kind of explains why he like lashes out at Saoirse like constantly. So like he also like the story is like it's dark.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
This whole book is very dark. Like there's never really a moment of shining bright rainbow in here.
And it's funny too, because like when I thought back about this book, because I read it a couple of years ago, I was like, oh yeah, this was like a cute story, the like swans and, it's cute and happy ending. And then I'm like reading it again and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, did I just like black all this out? Like trauma, like, oh, don't think about that.
Yeah, it is a fairy tale and it does have it has the kind of ending that you and I like, but my God, like it is not a happy story.
Yeah.
It is.
It's like a real fairy tale.
You suffer.
Like the fucked up ones.
Exactly. So just as Simon is starting to really recover, like you can see visible progress happening, Saoirse is rather suddenly called away, like back to the home castle by her brothers, who bring news of their father's return, and he's not returning alone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
she's like,
their goodbye scene is so fucking cute because he's like, you promised me. I didn't have enough details for the goodbye scene. You tell it. Oh my God. Cute. I know this episode is already like probably like way too long, but oh my God, this goodbye scene, like gut wrenching. So, the brothers are coming up the hill and Finbar kind of like communicates via head thought to Saoirse. He's like, you got to hide, Simon. Like we're coming up the hill. And so she's like, oh my God, Simon, like go into the Father Brian, Jesus, just like combining those two. He's like, go into the cottage, like bar the door, they won't see you. And so Saoirse's like, oh my God, like, what are you guys doing here? I'm just by myself, like, ignore these like bloody rags and stuff. Like, who are those? Weird. And Finbar's like, okay, I'll buy you some time. Like, I'll take them back myself and, you can like ride on after us or something so that you can say goodbye to Simon. And so she like goes into the cottage and he's like, you're leaving? And she's like, I don't want to leave. I have to. Like, my father came home and like, I have to go back. And he's like, but you promised me. And she's like, I know, I'm so sorry. Like, I think but remember, you also made a promise to me. And he's like, yeah, but like, you said that you would never leave me. And she's like, yeah, I know, but you said that you would stay alive for me. And like, you're going to keep going. And so like, obviously super emotional, like parting. And then he gives her a little like wood carving. And then as she's like turning away, he like goes to like put a knife to her throat and he's like, you lied to me. But then instead of like actually like cutting her, hurting her, he takes a little bit of her hair. My heart.
So both the wooden trinket that he gives her and the lock of hair are very important, and I'm kicking myself for not remembering it.
Yeah. I think the trinket actually maybe was given by Finbar to her later, but there's a trinket. Like he carved this cute little like fantastical trinket. It is Finbar.
It's definitely Simon gives it to her.
Oh yeah, but it's like this cute little trinket. So it's like he's been kind of a good guy the whole time, despite like being mean to her. And then he takes her hair. I'm emotional.
I wish there are some episodes I wish we had video recording just for all of your reactions.
I have a very expressive face.
Very, but like the arms too.
Yeah. The like frill-necked lizard arms came up as I'm like stressed out, like the hair. Mm-hmm. Oh, God, that scene, it like ruined me. Because it also like leads up, because there's doubt now. Sorsha's like, oh my God, like, is he going to make it? Like, I broke my end of the promise, so maybe he's going to break his end of the promise. And then like he runs away, as we like learn later. And she's like convinced that he like just ran off into the woods to like unalive himself. And so you're like, oh, like they were so close, and then like the thing happened, and the thing, and the hair. Anyways, I'm emotional.
It's, I mean, justifiably so, given this scene. Well, she goes home, and then we meet her. Yeah. Enter Lady. Okay,
I'm Googling
going
it
to
right
attempt
now.
to say this name. Is it Oonagh?
How to pronounce Oonagh correctly?
The goose.
Oonagh.
We might want to split.
There we go. Oonagh. That man talked for 45 seconds before saying the fucking name. Oh.
Well,
anyways.
I read it as Oonagh the entire time.
I did too.
It sounds ugly, and she deserves an ugly name.
Yeah, it sounds more accurate. She's like
Oonagh.
Ursula from The Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid.
Yep.
So she enters the family as Lord Cullum's fiance. She is very young, very beautiful, long red hair, because of course she has red hair, and she makes her presence very known. But initially, she is very nice and welcoming to all of the children, especially, wink, wink, Diarmid.
But it's that nice that's like, sugar
it's
alcohols?
Mean girl nice is what it is.
Sugar alcohols, like in zero sugar energy drinks, have that like fake sweet. That's exactly the parallel. That's the most obscure metaphor reference I think I've made. But she's like the sugar alcohols.
I live off of zero sugar monsters.
Yeah.
So
it's that
fine.
like, it's not real. It like tastes fake. But you're like, this gets the job done, I guess. But like, what is this?
It's like, it's the smile that like super Botox people get.
Yeah.
Like, no lines.
Yep.
No wrinkles.
Yep.
Just full fake.
And it like doesn't reach their eyes.
Yeah, that's Lady Oonagh.
Yep,
Oonagh. Yeah, I'm not saying Oonagh. She doesn't deserve Oonagh.
Yeah.
So Connor, or not Cullum is enthralled by this woman and like seems to cater to her every wish and desire. And Diarmid like obviously wants her. Like Liam is engaged to Seamus's daughter, and he's uninterested in this woman because of his other engagement. But Cullum starts to alienate all of his men based on how he starts acting and behaving and the decisions he's making because of this woman's influence. And like some insidious things start to happen around the castle. Again, like Oonagh is being very nice the whole time. She like brings Sorsha up to her room and it's like, I need to buy you a new dress, and like, let's make your hair, and like, you deserve like to be a lady and treated well. Like she's saying all the right things, but it just sits weird.
And she even has like a magic mirror that has like freaky red eyes on it that like as she's brushing Sorcia's hair, Sorcia's like, oh my God, she's trying to like read my mind right now. And she ends up saying more than she means.
Jafar's like snake thing.
I also pictured Snow White, the mirror. Yeah. Ooh, freaky.
Yeah, very creepy. And both Sorcia and Finbar are like, nah, fuck this bitch. Like, we don't believe a thing you're saying. Like, we know you're powerful. We know, like, we can't do anything, but we're going to resist as much as possible. And so Oonagh, like, starts to pick up on this, and some bad things start happening. So Sorcia's herb garden and her, like, little storeroom where she brews all her potions and stuff is completely destroyed. Yeah. Like, everything's ripped up. Everything's gone.
Oh, because this one is heartbreaking. Even, like, double horrible, because so what happens is like Oonagh is like, oh, you can't go out into the town or like the little village anymore to help people and like heal them, because that's not like what a proper lady would do. And Sorcia's like, okay, like that doesn't really sit well with me, but like I guess you're right, like you know better than I do. And then old Tom comes up and he's like, there's like a baby in the town that like needs help and he's like sickly, and she's like, yeah, I'll just do it this one time. Like, she's probably not being serious. And so she spends the whole day helping all these people. And then she comes back and she's like, what is wrong with and everything's like on fire and shit's like completely gone. And like, you just feel her heart breaking, like this super traumatic. And it just shows like Oonagh is one of those petty, like knows exactly where to hurt. Like, oh, you're not going to listen to me? I'm going to fuck up your life.
Yeah. And she does it to like multiple siblings. So, and the dog Lynn, this is awful. So Cormac, let me backtrack. The dog Lynn comes to Sorcia and she has this huge gash across her face. And Sorcia's like fixes her up, like sews her up, gives her some stuff, and Lynn is fine. And so she goes to, I think, another brother and is wondering like, who would do this to this sweet, gentle dog? And Cormac, this is Cormac's dog. Cormac appears and just completely shamefaced. And it's because Cormac did it. He lashed out and like slapped this dog across the face with like a staff. And he just doesn't understand why he did it. Like, he went from like practicing fighting in this arena to whirling around and hurting his own dog. And this is when they start putting the pieces together of like, oh, like, wait, wasn't Oonagh there? Wasn't she watching you train? And they kind of conclude that Cormac was like influenced or controlled to lash out at his dog for no reason.
And then there was also the scene, so before Seamus's daughter, so Liam's betrothed or whatever, leaves, she gets like really horribly sick. And everyone is like, oh, that's like super weird. Maybe she like ate something off. And so they call for Sorcia. And this is like before all the like other crazy stuff has happened. And she's like, wait a second, like she was poisoned, and like it had to be someone that knew exactly how much poison to put into her meal to like not kill her but like warn her. And so this kind of like starts the like inkling feeling of like there is something wrong, like someone's trying to divide us up, try to separate us, because like now the kids can't go to the dad and be like, oh my God, Oonagh, you know, tried to murder Liam's fiance, because it's like they don't have proof. So it's that like super insidious where you're like, I know you're fucking doing shady stuff, but I can't prove it. And like, no one's going to believe me, but like, you're a crazy bitch.
Dude, and the final straw, and this is another really hard scene to read, is so Podrick is known for being like the caretaker, like he's like the animal guy. And so he has like a donkey that he's been taking care of, and like a mother cat and her kittens, and this like crow with a broken wing, and all of these animals just start dying off one by one. And like they wrote a couple of them off as like, oh well, the donkey was older, so okay, now that's plausible. But the crow was like recovering, like and making progress, and then just
I think they described it, his like neck was bent at a weird angle, so you like double know it's like that's not natural causes.
Yeah. And so they finally, like Liam, the eldest brother, he resolves to like confront Cullum, his dad, about everything that's going on, because Liam is the closest with Cullum, and Cullum respects him the most and is actually the most likely to listen to him. So he and his father are walking and kind of having a conversation, and it seems like Cullum is more receptive and is like open to hearing what he's saying. But just as they get to a point in the conversation where Liam's about to broach the subject of Oonagh, this bitch comes running out and like runs up to Cullum, is like, "Oh, hi, honey, I'm pregnant." Great. Yeah. And he's completely distracted.
And like the way this scene, because it's described from Saoirse's point of view, because she's like hiding in the bushes and watching this, you can like perfectly fucking like picture it. Like, so they're having this conversation and there's like a glimmer of like, you know, understanding and doubt in Cullum's eyes of like, huh, that is like some like weird shit. And then here she comes, this like glorious, like glittering, you know, has the blush of early pregnancy going on. And she like has, you know, her hair flying in the wind, and I imagine that she didn't have shoes on and her like dress is like flying up and she's like, oh my God, and like her skin's all sparkly and stuff and has like this pretty little like blush going on. So you can like perfectly imagine the way it's described, and then you get Saoirse's like, this fucking bitch. So it's like this fun like, oh
yeah, like it's like the almost save the day moment.
Yeah, and then it's just
stolen,
taken away. Oh, that's the worst. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then meanwhile, like Oonagh starts to hint that she suspects that she knows who helped the prisoner Simon escape. And like this is kind of like the dead and done point. Like, oh, they're like, oh shit, we have to do something. Like, so the siblings agree to meet at their mother's sacred tree and ask the fair folk, the lady of the forest, for help. And they end up actually having to drag Diarmid along to the meeting because he's love struck. Like, will hear no wrong of this woman. Like, he was seen coming out of her rooms like late at night once.
Yep.
Just come on, Diarmid. So just when they all gather at this tree, and just when they chant some really cool like foresty things, it's very mystical and like
ceremony.
I can't ceremonial. Like, I can't do justice to like how it's described the ceremony is, but it's very like thoughtful and respectful. Yeah. So they complete their summoning ritual, and a cloaked woman like appears on the lakeshore, like out of nowhere, and they just breathe this huge sigh of relief. Until, surprise, a bitch is back.
Yep.
And the brothers just yell at Saoirse to run, and she goes scrambling into the forest, just hauling balls, like doesn't pause. She listens to her brothers and goes. And she's accompanied by Lynn. Lynn runs after her. And just as she like makes her escape, like she turns around and starts to see her brothers turning. And her last vision of her 6 brothers are them turning into swans.
Yeah. And like this scene, like bad as is, except of course, so Finbar is obviously like turning into a swan going through this traumatic event. And so he can't help but like project his thoughts out to his sister. So his sister, even though, you know, she was like escaped and, you know, got out alive and like whole, she has to still experience it secondhand through Finbar's like perspective, as she's just like, oh, you guys are so stupid. You really thought that the lady of the forest was going to come and save you? Like, ha ha ha. Like, you don't know anything about fucking magic. And then like experiences the trauma of like not only feeling that transformation herself, but also the like herself having to watch all of her brothers turn into swans. Like the whole scene is just so like, and then you cry.
Like as if it couldn't get any worse.
As if it couldn't get any more sad.
Like, and this is the first, I don't know, 150 pages.
Yeah.
We are not far into the book.
Yep.
It seems like a lot has happened, but
just
really
trauma bonding.
Is like the prequel. Yeah. So
Bruh.
That's a lot. Yep. That's a lot for part 1.
Yep. And it's funny too, because we were talking about like how many episodes we wanted to do for this book. And we were both like, oh, you know, there's like not a lot of like plot points that really happen. Cause like when you think back, like not a lot really did happen, like specific points, but there's so much to talk about. And we're like, oh yeah, it's like, these will be short episodes. an hour and something.
It never happens like that.
No.
Just never.
Because there's just so many good things that are worth discussing in this book. That's like, it's a good book when you just want to like digest and look at each little phrase and be like, oh my God, like this points to this.
And just like sit in admiration of this author who created this. It's magical. Oh, also, final point, like completely out of Source's story. So this author also wrote, I think, at least 2 fantasy books that are geared towards younger readers. And by younger, I mean like teens. So these would be like true YA new A books. So a lot of the more graphic trigger warning level stuff doesn't happen in those books. So if you are looking for something by this author with the same level of like great description, I would check out those 2 books.
Yeah. Oh, I might have to read those.
Well, that wraps up part 1. So from our shelf to yours.
We'll see you on the next page. Hi, readers. If you'd like to help us pick our next book, send us a message on Instagram.
Or if you'd like to just listen, we post new episodes every Monday on Spotify, Amazon, or Apple Music. Thanks for listening.